Right, Ben. We were talking about Baroque art in Holland, Dutch Baroque art, and the Baroque period, which is roughly the 17th century, is characterized for Holland by war. And this is true for Flanders as well. We had looked at Rubens, right, the last class on whatever that last day we met was, Monday. And that is who they're fighting against. It's a border war. But it's also a religious war, right? Spanish Netherlands, Flanders, is Catholic. They are governed by the Spanish king. He is Catholic. The United Provinces of the Netherlands, also known as Holland, is Protestant, right? And we had started to talk about this a little bit on Monday. Protestantism is based on Martin Luther and the Reformation. His protests against the Catholic Church gives the name Protestant. By the way, Halloween was the 500th anniversary of the birth of Protestantism. That was the night that Martin Luther went to Wittenberg and nailed his 95 Theses, his 95 beefs with the Catholic Church, nailed them to the church door, and challenged the local archbishop to a debate. And he was ignored, right? And we talked about this before, right? He was ignored for like 25 years. And it took until 1543 for the church to do anything. It was 500th anniversary this year, right? Long and the short of it. Right? Now, that Protestantism gave rise to a number of sort of subsects. So if you think about Protestantism as a group, it's different than Catholicism in that under Catholicism, you kind of got Catholicism, right? And there's Roman Catholicism, and there are others that sort of fit within the Eastern Orthodox Church, right, and whatnot. But under Protestantism, you've got a number of subsects. So there's Lutherans, right? There's the Calvinists. More recently, there's the Baptists, right? There's the Presbyterians, right? And there's the what? The Episcopalians. Episcopalians, right? Those are all Protestants, right? And then more and more that way, right? So during the 16th, 17th century, these are two of the more prominent ones, followers of the writings of Luther, followers of the writings of John Calvin, Calvinists, right? The Dutch are Calvinists, for the most part. There's one area of Holland that stayed Catholic. But there are 17 United Provinces, 16 of 17 are Dutch. Or, no, they're all Dutch. 16 of 17 are Calvinists. Okay? The Calvinists are very, very strict. They have very, very strict rules about ostentatious display, about sort of moral codes, how you should behave in public. It's very restrained. So what we see when we look at Dutch Baroque art is nowhere near as flamboyantly dramatic as the other countries. In addition to that, because they're Protestants versus Catholics, they don't decorate their churches with altarpieces, sculptures of saints. They don't even buy into the whole cult of saints. The whole idea of, saints as intercessors for prayers. They don't buy into that, right? They don't buy into the sainthood of the Virgin Mary. That's all part of the Catholic approach. Protestants are much more sort of you and Jesus. Right? And that's what it counts. So churches don't have crucifixes. They might have a cross, but no Jesus on it. Right? Much more spare in the way that they're decorated. Right? That means the art that we see in Holland, this affects it in two different ways. One is that it's going to be less flamboyant. Right? They don't care. They don't give a flying whatever about the Council of Trent, because that was Catholics, right? So those rules about religious art that the Council of Trent said, right, dramatic, pious, right, doesn't matter, okay? In addition to that, whereas within the Catholic countries we saw lots of pictures of saints, right? In the Protestant countries, less of that, different kinds of art, because the churches are decorated with religious imagery. Now, we don't have none, but we don't have as much. The focus is elsewhere. And so in Holland, Protestant, what we have are works of art that are made to decorate people's houses or civic institutions. And we tend to see a lot more portraits, landscapes, scenes of everyday life, still lives, secular works of art, rather than religious works of art. Not exclusively, but a lot more of them. Right? So Protestantism in Holland, the 80 Years' War against Spain and Flanders, has a huge impact on art. Right? Different kinds of art, and we'll see the style is different. So, our picture on the right by Frans Hals. He's working in the town of Haarlem, and I think I got a slide here for that, right? So he's working in the town of Haarlem, AA Haarlem, after which the section of Manhattan was named, right? Back when Manhattan and New York was New Amsterdam, right? Frans Hals is working in Haarlem. It's just outside of Amsterdam. It's a major city, very, very wealthy, and very closely linked to Amsterdam just nearby. They had like one of the first intercity transport services. Every hour you could take a boat from Amsterdam to Haarlem, right? Ferry service back and forth. These are the military men who were sworn to protect the city of Haarlem during the 80 Years' War. And they commissioned this very, very large picture. Let's see if I don't think I have the dimensions here, but it's, I would say 17 feet across the base or so. It's huge. It's a group portrait. Let me finish this, I'll get you, okay? It's a group portrait of the members of the militia in 1639, okay? And this would then decorate the hall where they met, right? It's commemorating that particular group, okay? So again, a non-religious picture, a portrait of the people who are serving this particular city during the 80 Years' War, right? Emma.
Why is there not that many of them?
These are the leaders. That's a very good question. Why are there so few of them? Two reasons. One, this is the leaders, and they had to pay to get their portrait included, so they're the wealthiest members of the group. We actually have the documents that talked about how much they paid, and it usually, the guy's in the middle. See the guy in yellow? He's the leader, and you can probably tell because he stands out, right? But the other figures that appear around him, we know from their costumes what they did. We don't know exactly who they are, right? But we know that some of them did pay, in fact, to be included. And sometimes how much you paid helped your prominence, right? So the guy in the upper left corner, right, probably didn't pay as much as the guy in the lower left corner, right? Now, the other reason that there are so few of them, Emma, and then I'll get you, Emma, is that there was more than one military company in each city. Right, so this is just one of, I think, 3 or 4 in Haarlem. And then Amsterdam would have some, right? And then Delft would have some. And then The Hague would have some, right? All of these different towns, Gouda, all the cheese names, right, would have these, right? Edam, right, would have them. Dordrecht, all of these. Right, so those are the 2 reasons why there aren't that many people. Emma too.
Are the figures life-size?
Yeah, roughly. Maybe even a little bit bigger than life-size, right? At least the ones in the front are, right? Yeah.
Also, I think we can recognize their position from the clothes. This is what I studied, that when it became higher, they have long, high position.
That's correct. Right. There is definitely an economic basis to those ruffs. The Dutch are well known for these sort of black outfits with the nice white ruff around their neck and around the sleeves. That's part of Calvinism, right? All black. Very restrained, no flashy colors, right? But they were able to sort of work around the rules by flashy ruffs. And the bigger the ruff, as you might expect, is more expensive. And in addition to that, the sashes that some of them are wearing also signify their particular role within the militia guild. So the blue sashes versus the orange sashes. The leader of the Dutch revolt, when it first started in 1568, was Duke William. And the name of his family tree was the House of Orange, William of Orange. And the orange that the figures are wearing are a reference back to that nationalist pride of William of Orange, right? To this day, World Cup qualifying right now. You guys follow real football, soccer, right? World Cup qualifying just took place. We're out, right? America didn't make it this year. Once every 4 years, the World Cup, right? The world. Holland are known as the Orange Men because they wear all orange. William of Orange, right? Most of the costumes are based on their flags. Holland's flag is red, white, and blue. Looks kind of like the French flag on its side, but the Dutchmen wear orange, right? The Orangemen is what they're known as. Now, Hals painted this same militia group on different occasions when they had different members, right? And each one of them, he does a really good job of making it look as if it's something more than just being posed. You know, they're not just sort of standing there. But it makes it look like they're in the middle of some activity. So on the right, it looks like they're getting ready to go out on a parade in their nicest outfits. On the left, they're having an annual meal. The city supported them. They gave them the money they needed for their weaponry. And they also gave them money for a nice banquet at the beginning of every year. So on the left, we see them at the banquet, right? And Hals has done a great job of making it look really spontaneous. Like, especially with the one on the left, right? You've just come to the room and everybody's like, hey, Alice, how you doing? Right? They turn and they're looking at you, right? Especially the guy in the foreground, right? With his elbow coming directly out at you. But again, that idea of the elbow coming toward you like this is part of this Baroque thing we've seen. Remember, Caravaggio would stick like the neck of a violin at you, right? Engage, be part of this, right? So Hals is really good at animating the scenes and making it look like the figures aren't really posing, but they're spontaneously caught in some sort of action. So maybe that is slightly Baroque in its way, right? That Baroque interest in action that we've seen everywhere we've looked. Now we've got a Frans Hals here. We've got actually 4 or 5 Frans Hals. I'm going to show you 2. One of the members of the Civic Guard. And in fact, we think this guy is maybe this guy, right?
Yeah.
Now, what's fascinating about our picture is that it is the only portrait he did of a member of the Civic Guard that was not a group portrait. It's the only solo portrait of any of those groups that he ever did. Even though he did 3 massive group portraits. The only solo. So why is there only this one? Bit of evidence number 2. Frans Hals was a member of that military company. That leads us to guess, and it's only a guess, that that's a self-portrait. Why else would that be the only, this inconsequential guy in the background? Why else would that be the only solo portrait of all of these people he ever painted from these military guilds in Haarlem? When we know that Frans Hals was a member of that guild, it suggests to us, right, there's no smoking gun, there's no proof. It suggests to us that this is probably him. And the thing that makes that kind of nice is that Frans Hals's work, with their spontaneity, have also a certain sense of humor. And I really think he looks like somebody who's probably got a good story or 2 to tell you. You know, somebody who is not all that serious all the time, right? And he is able in all of his portraits, I love this picture. It's one of my favorite pictures in the National Gallery. He's able with all of his portraits to imbue them, to fill them with a sense of vibrancy and liveliness, right? To see past the facade of the face, to see past the pose, and make them seem as if they're brimming with life. And this woman especially so, right? So here she's got her Calvinist black dress on, that wonderful ruff, which, by the way, by 1633, that ruff was out of date. So she's like this old lady wearing old lady clothes, right? Younger women were wearing different kinds of ruffs. That big one with the folds was not so much. And you'll notice that she's sitting on the chair, but she's also, as she's seated, right? So imagine I'm in an armchair here. This hand here is actually grabbing the arm like this, right? Her proper left hand on your right is grabbing the seat here. And she's closed up her Bible. She's got a Bible in her hand, right? Tiny little personal Bible in her hand. And it's almost like she's about ready to stand up, right? She's going to help herself up out of that chair. So he's turning to look at us. Oh, hi, how are you? Right? And she's about to say, hey, welcome. Come on, let's go to the kitchen and get a cup of tea. Although looking at her face, I'm betting it's beer, right? Because she just has that humor about her, right? Now, one of the things that Frans Hals does that makes it seem so spontaneous, so lifelike, is he does something we saw Vermeer doing with his painting style. And that is leaving a lot of the paint unresolved. He doesn't blend the strokes so that you get a constant grading from highlight to shadow, right? He makes it look as if it was painted quickly. Flashes of paint, especially in the blacks, but also on her hand, right? Now it wasn't painted quickly. It just looks like it was. We know he took a lot of time with these things, right? But that's an undercurrent that he uses to make the painting seem more vibrant, more lifelike. And we see it everywhere we look, right? Just this sort of sketchiness to it, right? I love that tiny little Bible, right? How do you read something that small, you know? But that's what prayer books look like. We've talked about with the Très Riches, the Rich Hours of John de Berry, right? Many people's prayer books, when they weren't lavishly illustrated, were tiny little things that you carry with you everywhere. Open it from here to there. Now, it's probably not the entire Bible, right? It's probably just like maybe Psalms, prayer book, right? Rather than the entire Bible, because goodness knows who could read that, you know, not me, not her, right? Yeah.
What's the word of his signing at the top?
On the left, it says how old she is and his name. Now, sometimes it'll even tell us who they are, but on the norm, they don't. So basically, that says that she's 60 years old and was painted anno 1633, right? So there's a 3-3 there. Etat sue 60. This woman was 60, right? So it identifies her age as well. He's fantastic when it comes to painting blacks. Many of you have taken studio art classes, right? Working with black is a pain in the ass, right? It's really difficult because, you know, how do you make black lighter? It takes forever, right? You got a little bit of black and you got to mix like a gallon of white in it to lighten it a bit, right? Or if you've got a little bit of white and you put just a tiny bit too much of black, it's gone, right? You got to throw it away. But look at the range of blacks he's got in here, where he gets the black embroidery that make up that bodice, right? Again, it's Calvinist, so it's got to be not too flashy, but the Dutch figured out ways to sort of show off expense through, for example, in this case, this wonderful embroidery that we see on it. I'd argue probably that there was never anybody ever that painted black as well as Frans Hals. He's really good with it, right? And the only other people that get good with it are people who look at his paintings, right? And they learn from this. And it's a trademark. It's a hallmark for him. God, and then there's that face, right? Doesn't she look like a hoot? She is the aunt at the family reunion that you actually want to talk to, you know? She's going to tell you where all the skeletons in the closet are buried, right? Anybody here from nursing or biology? Do you know Rosemary Hubbard? Right? I think that's Rosemary in a nutshell. And Rosemary's like that too. I mean, I love Rosemary dearly, and she's a scream, right? When she's off the stage, she's really, really funny. And that woman has very much that same sort of look. Rosemary probably wouldn't like me telling that. But notice also that even though we saw that flashy brushwork with the hands and the dress down below, when it comes to rendering tightly and perfectly, he can do that, can't he? Look at the ruff and how the light plays through that figure 8 folded ruff, right? And how he's captured it throughout. I wouldn't even want to try, you know? But it's tightly painted where he needs it because that brings our attention to her face, right? So he's really good with this idea of characterizing. And part of the way he got so good with it is not only with his use of the brushwork, but also because he's done a number of genre scenes. We've talked about genre scenes, right? ones, scenes of everyday life. But he does them differently in a way. They're very unjudgmental. They don't seem moralizing at all. They seem engaging and friendly. The jolly drinker. Toper means drinker, right? The jolly drinker. He's met you at a pub, right? He's this well-dressed gent. And hey, how are you? Want a beer? Right? That's exactly what he's doing. It's again that Baroque appeal to our senses. The senses beyond sight. It's something that we've talked about again and again, how the Baroque artists are appealing to our five senses at once. And here we can hear him. He's reaching out towards his half-drank beer. He's, yeah, you're going to take a half-drunk beer from somebody. No backwash, I promise, right? But he's got that beautiful Dutch cup. I always wanted to buy one of those, right? But look at the brushwork on the cup around it. You see the same sort of flashiness. And even though this is just a genre scene where the whole point is to get you engaged with this scene of everyday life, he brings that same life, that same vibrancy into his portraits. Right? And I think because he's dancing between the two, between both portraits and genre scenes, is one of the things that makes those genre scenes, or those portraits, so infectious, so engaging. Right? It's because he's already honed those skills working as a genre painter. Another artist that does similar scenes of revelry is Judith Leister. I haven't seen many women artists in this class yet. This one's over at the Women's Museum, the National Museum of Women in the Arts. And you'll have to forgive the bluish things. Those are reflections on the glass. I tried to Photoshop, get that out of there, but I can't, right? But again, it's a scene of a genre scene that continue into the 17th century, that began with people like Whitman Matthijs, or Hieronymus Bosch, or Bruegel, right? And have continued into the 17th century. But there are these scenes of revelry, right? Three musicians playing music together. A singer, got her mouth open, cheeks all red, probably drinking, right? Man on the left playing the violin, the man on the right with the lute. And the whole point of the picture is you. Right? They're almost like they're saying, come and join us, even though there's not a musical instrument waiting for us to join. But maybe like the girl in the back, we're supposed to be singing. Right? You're taking part. You're participating in this. Now, does this scene of Music Makers remind you of anybody we looked at? Just the theme in general? Caravaggio, exactly right, Tracy. Caravaggio. And I brought our old Caravaggio that we'd seen before. You'll notice that she's ditched the Caravaggio lighting, right? There's no dramatic spotlight poking across coming from one side, right? But there is this idea of these music makers that appeal to our five senses, right? Or more than just our sense of sight. And engage with us. Recognize that we're there and bring us into it. Caravaggio a bit more heavy-handedly with the violin saying, Carla, you take the violin. In this case, they're just looking at us, waiting for us to sort of pipe in, right? Okay, here we are, and now sing, right? And that's sort of where they are. The girl is a self-portrait. That's Judith Leister in the picture. And here, oh wait, back up. I'm ahead of myself by one slide. Leister never went to Italy. She never saw Caravaggio in her life, right? What she did see are other Dutch artists who did go to Italy, sent pictures back. So if she's remember we had this big word, Caravaggisti, right? She's sort of a second-hand Caravaggisti, right? A granddaughter, if you will. Because she's getting her Caravaggio things from other artists. So it filters down a bit. It's also a wonderful picture, right? Again, less engaging, I think, than hers, but at the same time, very much like Frans Hals, right? There's the figure up in the back. This drink, can't wait, right? This is what this is all about. And here's our choir master pointing at the words. Let's start again from here, right? Okay, and now let's go. And you can kind of tell why probably they're losing their place, because they're mixing this little job with that little job up there. Now, like I said, she's a self-portrait. We have her self-portrait at the National Gallery. So here she is in the act of painting. I'm sorry this one got a little bit pixelated. This is my old camera rather than my new one, so it's not as good a picture as some of the other ones. But you see she's in the act of painting the kinds of works that she's known for. Right? Music makers, revelers were her specialty. And there she is with her palette, all of her brushes. Look at how many brushes she's holding at once. I don't know why you need all of those, but she's a better painter than I am, right? And she's got the one, she's loaded it with ink, and she's taking a second, right? You've interrupted her. Does she mind? Not at all. I'm happy to see you, right? Unlike me in my office sometimes. You come in to see me in my office, I'm busy working, get out of here. But no, she's like, yeah, hi there. And it's very sort of casual, isn't it? You know, an arm over the back of the chair, right? It's really relaxed and really spontaneous seeming. And she's laughing, right? She's smiling and laughing at us as she paints. But you'll notice that the clothing she wears to paint in are really inappropriate clothes to paint in, aren't they? Look at the ruff that she's wearing. That amazing pie plate of a ruff, right? With the fringe on the edge that almost touches the wet paint of the canvas. Right? Not the right kind of clothing. Why buy a ruff that expensive if you're going to get the edges covered in muck? You know what? So why is she dressed this way? Why is she dressed wrong? This is something we talked about before when we looked at Velázquez. Right? Remember in Las Meninas, Velázquez is dressed like a nobleman while he's painting?
To show her position.
She's dressed like an aristocrat.
Yeah.
So what's the point? Why show yourself this way?
To show her that she's important, her position.
Painting makes her important, right? Painting is a noble profession. That a whole point of a self-portrait, what's the point of a portrait anyway? Any portrait is to show off your status, right? To show off what you do. So all of Frans Hals's militiamen, right? They're important. They're in the portrait for that reason. Self-portraits, they're almost egotistical, right? They're bragging. This is what I am, right? Why would anybody want a portrait of Judith Leister? And if you've got a portrait of Judith Leister, shouldn't it tell you not only what she does, but why it's important in the first place? So the clothing adds to that. We think that she made this on the year that she was accepted as a master in the Painters Guild. Right? So she's now joined the official group of painters in her city, and we think that she might have made this as a gift to them. Here, put this up on the wall with other portraits of painters. Right? So that's a distinct possibility. We have no way of proving it, right? But certainly it ties into something we've seen before and we will see again, which is that we see a lot of self-portraits of painters actively painting, and we can get a lot of clues about how they painted. All those brushes, right? The paint on the palette that she's holding in her hand, how she hangs how an easel worked, right? These are little peg holes, so you can move it up and down, right? We can get nice details about that sort of stuff. At the same time, it's an artifice, and it's showing us this bit of propaganda about how painting makes artists important. There's a close-up of her face. What a great face, right? Just laughing. You see her teeth, right? As she's laughing and smiling and breathing. It's really spontaneous. So with Leister and Frans Hals, we're seeing specialists, right? Frans Hals does portraits and genre scenes. Leister does genre scenes, although they're a particular kind. They're these revelers, right? Scenes of revelry. What we were going to look at as we look at Dutch art is almost every artist found some kind of specialty, right? They would specialize in a particular kind of painting. Right? So we don't have Frans Hals landscapes. We don't have Judith Leister's still lifes, right? We have portraits and revelers from them. And that's because the economy in Holland was so strong. Everybody's buying pictures. People who visit Holland remark on the fact that you go to farmhouses and they have pictures, right? Because they were cheap, they were affordable, because there were so many artists and so many works. Jan van Goyen is a landscape painter. This is all he does, landscape paintings. And this is a view of a town sort of, a little bit north of Amsterdam. It's on the convergence of 3 rivers, so it's surrounded by water. Dordrecht, right? And really, landscapes like this are all he ever did. Now, Dordrecht in particular was an interesting theme for him to choose, and a marketable one. Remember from the worksheets that most people bought their works in the open market, right? They're not commissions anymore. They're being sold on the open market. This would have had an audience. Not only somebody who lived in Dordrecht, right? But other reasons. Dordrecht is one of the oldest towns in all of Holland. Right? One of the oldest. So, nationalism, you're fighting for your independence, right? 80 Years' War. Getting to the end of that, you don't know it's going to end, but you've been fighting your entire life for independence. The map is being redrawn. You're getting independent from Spain. Heritage becomes important, right? Old cities. This is who we are, regardless of who's been in charge of us in the past. Dordrecht as an old city became a very, very attractive subject matter. In addition to that, Holland in the 17th century is undertaking a major project to dry out the country. Now, Holland lays at sea level for the most part, right? And parts of Holland are below sea level. Now, how do you get parts below sea level? What Holland did, at the same time that they're fighting for their independence, they put up a series of dikes and then used windmills, not only to grind the grain, right, but also to operate pumps that would push the water over the dike and into the ocean on the other side. And give yourself dry land where there used to be ocean. Really ingenious. And I was really surprised to find this out. I did a paper on this in grad school. More than 1/3 of the country at the beginning of the 17th century was water and land by the middle of the century. Right? So at the same time that they're drawing the borders of the country, this is us, this is you, right? They're also taking a huge part of the low-lying straits of water, and they're turning it into farmland. Point of pride, right? This is our country. The land to the Dutch is incredibly important, right? And we find, really, I think if we're going to look back and statistically look at the Dutch pictures from the 17th century, you'll find more landscapes than anything else. In part because of this interest, in part because they were the cheapest paintings you could buy. Right? They don't require as much skill as a biblical scene. Right? Not to know as much about historical costume than a scene from ancient Rome. Right? Doesn't require the same amount of talent as a portrait might. So they were cheaper. Right? So there we see one of our windmills on the left, sitting right on the bulwark of the dike. Right? And this river sort of gently moving through it. And we have to imagine that some of the land that we're looking at may well be land that was reclaimed from the sea. Right? So, why are landscapes important? Why is Dordrecht important? Why do they love these kinds of pictures? It's because it is what makes Holland Holland. It's their identity. Right? Landscapes appear everywhere. At the same time, right, we also see an amazing interest in just sort of like the ins and outs of everyday life. They're really looking at what's going on around them. What does it mean to be a Dutchman in 1644? Or in whatever year, right? And they're really looking at the world around them and capturing, again with this incredible, sort of like Frans Hals, with incredible spontaneity and vibrancy, they're capturing what it was like to be alive at that particular point. The most mundane details of everyday life, right? This is a picture of commuting, right? The ferry going across the the river. It's taking people from the suburbs to town. The larger boat with the sail that's being offloaded, I have details of this, right? Will take them to another city. This is like making a wonderful painting of 66, at 8 in the morning, right? No traffic jams, right? But it's busy and buzzing with activity. And here on the shore, right beneath, we can see figures. In addition to the commuters, we've got people who are doing other things, right? Mucking around on the shore. I had this to talk about. Dordrecht is one of the oldest cities. That's why I have that slide there. I'm ahead of myself. And here is a nice close-up. And again, signed on the boat, right? V. Goyen, 1644. So that's how we know the date. But again, it's just this sort of mundane everyday life. Here's our nifty little skiff. It's going to work its way across the river. I think that these boats were mostly pulled by line across the river, right, back and forth. Like that, there's that shuttle up the Potomac, right, where you can take. We did that once. What's the name of it? You know what this is? There's a place where you can come from Maryland. There's another way to get from Maryland to Virginia without going across the Memorial Bridge. Harper's Ferry. No, that's where John Brown was. That was Harper's Ferry. This is Karen. She's a French teacher. That's my wife. That's why I'm saying we. There's another place where there's this. Anyway, there's a cable boat that goes from look it up. Right. Same thing here. Shuttling people back and forth from this side, where it's more suburban, rural, to the actual hub of the city. Right. It's just an image of commuting. And there's our close-up of the figures in the boat, and they would, with the larger boats that drew more water, right? In other words, they couldn't go in the shallower parts. They would ferry the people out with little boats, get on the bigger boat, and off you go. Okay. So Van Goyen is capturing these sort of everyday life, and you can see, looking back into the atmospheric perspective, the mist in the background, how many of these are going on. This is Holland prosperous, right? This is Holland as this country that's doing incredibly well. And it's this strange paradox, because they're fighting the Spanish. And we talked about this. The Spanish are going broke. The Dutch are just, it's somehow the war economy for them worked, right? And maybe it's because they're on their home soil. They don't have to send people abroad to fight. But this is the period when the Dutch East India Corporation, right, Hudson's Bay and all of that, is going strong. Right? They are the kings of the high seas. And that's some of that pride is what we see in some of these pictures. Now, there's a question, is there some sort of metaphor? We've often talked about metaphors, right? With genre scenes, we've seen metaphors. Is there some sort of metaphor here as well? It's hard to say. Maybe there is. And sometimes, definitely there is. I think this one is more just sort of reveling in these everyday activities. There's a guy on the left. He's baiting or emptying a trap. So I bet it's eels. They love eating eels, right? It's a fish. It just doesn't look like. When you get it on the plate, it's going to taste like a fish. I know, but right? It's a snake that swims. But he's probably an eeler, right? And got his eel trap because that water around him is pretty shallow, right? So what else is going to be there? He's not out there getting sturgeon, right? But an eeler, and I know the Dutch diet. It could be herring. They love herring as well. That's a possibility, right? But given that these are rivers, I'm guessing eel. So the Dutch love landscape pictures. They love these images of their country because they've redrawn the map and they've gotten all this land back from the sea. Right? This has inspired them to just adore these images, and people love buying them. So. Van Goyen is one of our landscape specialists. Jacob van Ruisdael is another. Right? My art history teacher always said Ruisdael. Right? Ruisdael is another. So what we have here is not as flat of a landscape, although it's pretty flat. This is the Low Countries after all. We don't have the wide, expansive river, though we still have a river cascading gently over a little waterfall running to the left. Under that bridge. And instead of having people in boats, we have people now walking, right, moving their way through the landscape. The Dutch were so interested in landscape that they wrote poems about walking through the dunes, walking through the woods. This became one of the principal subjects of Dutch poetry. And they talk about, these poems do, how wonderful it is to go out and look at the trees and smell the leaves and hear the water, right? And get close to this land that is who they are. And Van Ruysdael's picture is certainly picking up on that idea. And we can trace many of the motifs we see in pictures like this directly to some of those poems that were so popular in the 17th century. Now this one I think we can sort of talk about metaphor, allegory. Because we see a woman with her son, I presume, and their dog, basket in her arm. We presume going to market, coming back from market, probably going because the basket looks empty. Right? So another scene of everyday life, just as nice as this can be. But Ruysdael chooses to paint them crossing a bridge. So an allegory there? What do we think about when we think about crossing a bridge? When we say it not literally, but when we say I'm crossing a bridge, we're moving to a different time of our life, right? We're transitioning from A to B. We're moving through life in one way or another. And when we read these Dutch poems that talk about what a joy it is to wander outside of the city. By the way, Holland was the most densely populated country in Europe in the 17th century. So getting out of the city was important, right? By the way, to this day, the most densely populated country in Europe. So getting out of the city, getting into the countryside was for them particularly important. Respite, right? Get away from it all. People said the most important thing in all of New York City is Central Park. Because without it, it would be a freaking nightmare, right? Nowhere to go to look at a tree, Nowhere to go to at least imagine that you're not in the middle of a city. These pictures have that same imagining, right? You look at them and you think about following them across that bridge into the countryside. Now, those same poems also said that as we wander through the countryside, we should think about our voyage through life. Sometimes you got a hill, sometimes you stub your toe, sometimes you got to get your feet wet. Right? They didn't say those exact things, but you get the idea, right? That it's more than just wandering, it's meditating in a way. Thinking about, reflecting on your own experience. So, our woman, child, puppy dog, crossing the bridge, might well be this idea of life's passage, right? Life going on, life moving. And with that, if we look closely, and I'll bring up the next slide here, right? Life is often kind of scary. And there's this guy. See him up there? Right? There's a guy coming toward him out of the shadows. On that same path. So they're going to go up over this hill, up over the rise, right? We don't know where. And there's this creepy guy walking toward him, right? Well, I think creepy. We don't know what he is. And it could be anything. It could be totally safe. But there is this question of, does wandering through the landscape, like life itself, afford us these, offer us these moments when we don't know what's going to happen next, and it can be a little bit scary? Right? Emma?
Was that explained somewhere? Because I don't know how you could possibly find that man anywhere in that picture.
That's because you haven't been to the National Gallery yet. No, I saw him. I just saw him.
You saw him.
I saw him. You walk down there, you can see him. Your eyes adjust better in front of the object than they do in the classroom. Can you see him?
So hard to find.
Can you see me now?
Kind of, I think. Is he
Okay.
up a little bit?
Here.
Come on the big one.
Let's do this, right?
You can see it better down there.
There's his legs. There's his body. Okay. I'm drawing with my fingertips, so give me a break. Okay. Right?
Now find him on the big one.
Oh, on the big one, he's right. Yeah,
I think it's easier on the big one.
it's right there.
Okay.
Right? You can see there's his legs.
Yeah.
There's his body. And in this one, right, same figure here. He's wearing a coat that sort of comes down about his knees, right? It's sort of a longer coat that stops right there. He's bent forward here, right? So shoulders, head, body, legs.
Got it.
Got it now?
Yeah.
And yeah, I was just like looking because you should. Okay, Emma. It's something I'm always picking on you, isn't it? Okay, this is why I think art history is like the greatest class I've ever taken. I mean, I didn't believe that I would be up here in the first place, right? And one of the reasons I think is that we in this world spend way too little time looking, while at the same time we spend way too much time looking, if you get my meaning.
Yeah.
So we look at everything in little 15-second bits, and we get bored if something doesn't happen fast. And we stop looking and we move on. And our history tells us to stop and look and spend some time, right? Because that scrutiny will be rewarded.
In my defense, I did do those little thing signs when I was little in the like highlighter magazines and
Uh-huh.
kids where you have to find them. But I
Where's
just,
It's the
Yeah.
Where's Waldo of art, right?
I just don't think I've ever.
And I'm not attacking you right now. I'm just saying that that's a very, very good point, though. Is that how do you see that? Well,
You gotta
spend
look.
time. You gotta look. Exactly right. You spend the time looking. And the nice thing is that every now and then you're rewarded with something really cool, right? You didn't see that at first. There's a painting by Roger. Remember Roger van der Weyden, the Deposition from the Cross, and we saw the little St. George. There's a painting by him in Boston. I've known it, forever. 20 years I've known that picture. And I saw it in Bruges. I saw a copy of it in Bruges. And I noticed, as I looked really closely, that directly behind the Virgin Mary in this picture, in the background, in the city, there's a guy peeing against the wall. And nobody had ever written about it. So I'm like, right? I'm going to write about piss. And so with Bruegel, I think we were talking about peeing men in the back. I got into this whole idea. So there's these little rewards that happen, and I think that translates outside of looking at pictures. That there's something to be said for slowing down, like literature class, right? You slow down. You say, okay, I'm going to look at this book, and I'll talk about the narrative first, and then I'm going to dive in, and I'm going to start talking about why did they use those words instead of these words, right? And you're going to analyze it more deeply. Biology class, right? We don't do botany here. We walk by trees all the time, but a biology class teaches you how it works, right? And you learn about cell structure and photosynthesis, I learned this stuff. It's been a long time since I learned this stuff, right? And you understand it better and look at it differently because of that, right? So again, it's the idea of slowing down. That's what college is kind of all about. Slow down and look, right? Spend some time trying to understand. So how did I find it? I saw it, right? I just saw him there. And it made me go to other Rousdaws. Who's working on Rousdaw? Right? So your picture's not this one. It's slightly bigger than this one, right? But there are people walking there, and I spent a lot of time looking in the background over the top of that hill to see if there's somebody coming after me. But there are these people walking back into the landscape in the same way as this one, right? Now, if this is all about life, right, the passage of time, and the idea of a walk as an analogy for your life, right? Hills as the difficult moments, flatlands as the easy times, right? Bridges as moving from A to B, right? Transitioning from high school to college, from college to the life after it, right? Then we should look at other things here and say, how do they add to that meaning, right? And in the foreground, we see water rushing over a small waterfall, erosion, the effects of time. We see a branch of a tree, probably, I'm guessing this tree in the middle, because there's a broken branch there. See that? Right? Another branch down here, right in the foreground. Right? Time passes, things change, right? Things break. Time passes, water erodes, it finds a way to a lower elevation. Right? These are all metaphors for the passage of time. Even the clouds up above, right? In this case, that tree is a birch tree. And the birch tree has very, very thin bark, almost like skin, white, and it peels off. And the Dutch likened birch trees in these poems I'm talking about to us, how our skin peels with age. Right? So there are elements within the landscape that add to this overall meaning of the passage of time. If we look on the hill, the subject matter really, right, the thing that takes up the most painting are these three trees. Now look closely at those three trees. Do you notice anything interesting about them as a group of three? They're different stages, exactly right. Right? Slow down in the. So you've got the one in the back is pretty healthy. The one in the middle is partly healthy but broken. And the one closest to us is less healthy and almost dead. Right? The passage of time. Life itself. We talk about the three ages of man. Right? So another way of adding meaning into the picture. Right? Now, three trees on a hill. Where do we find three trees on a hill?
When Christ was killed.
Say it.
Crucifixion.
The crucifixion of Christ. Cut from a tree, planted on a hill, two thieves on this, one on the other side. Right? Three trees on a hill. Are we meant then to look at the landscape and by looking at the landscape understand something greater? The presence of God. Again, if we look back at these poems, that's one of the things they told us. Right? Why would you go out to nature? One, it's good for you. Right? Two, you understand yourself. Three, you understand God through His creation. Right? So what seems like a fairly simple picture, and I don't want to get away from the fact that these are just wonderful to look at, right? And what we looked at with Van Gogh, that they're just kind of fun images of everyday life. Not funny, but entertaining, enjoyable, right? And you hang it in your house, and you don't have to leave to go wander in the country. You sit and you look. And if you look longer, things appear that didn't appear at first. But beyond that, there are these other elements of meaning that come into the world. So, Rousdale, Van Goyen, both landscape specialists. Sometimes with landscapes we find metaphor, right? Allegory, deeper meaning. Other times, maybe not so much. Although a ferry crossing a river has the same meaning as a couple crossing a bridge. Right? It's all about transitioning to the other side. Now, Hede, Willem Cleysson Hede, SZ at the end of a Dutch name means son of. Right? So he's William, son of Cleys Hede. Right? Cleysson Hede. Specialized in still life painting. And we haven't looked at still lifes yet, right? This is our first one. A still life is kind of like a work of art you make twice as a painter or as a draftsman, as an artist. Because on one level you set the thing up, so you're kind of making a work of art. And then you sit down and you paint it. Right? So this is all he does. There are no landscapes by Hede. There are no portraits by Hede. He is a still life painter. He is cornering one particular part of the market. And he does some that are more simple tables, some that are more elegant banquet tables. This is what we have here. It's a banquet still life. The aftermath of an amazing meal. Mince pie. A mince pie is something that the Dutch only eat on special occasions. It's made with local fruit, mostly currants. If you ever had currants, they're really tart, like really, really strongly flavored, right? But it's made with currants, and it's spiced with imported spices from Turkey, right, from Istanbul. And because of the expense of the spices used in a mince pie, you don't eat it every day. Over and above that, who wants ice cream every single day? It's better if you have like once a week because it's special, you know? But things that are as potently flavored as that is not something you have every single day, right? Why do we only have fruitcake at Christmas? Well, we don't. We get the fruitcake and we send it to somebody else instead. Right? That's a really, it's not something you want to have every day, right? Why do you only have pumpkin pie on Thanksgiving? Because it's kind of pretty hefty with flavor, right? All those cinnamon, cloves, and whatnot, right? We save them for special occasions. Ditto with the mince pie, although it's the main dish here, right? This is a special meal. And you'll notice if we look around that everything else on the table suggests that this is a special meal as well, right? We have very, very special things on the table. We have this wonderful brass goblet with a lid on it. And on top is a little sculpture of Poseidon, the god of the sea, the trident. Right? Really expensive piece of metalwork. There's this stemmed dish here, right? And Kleist has turned it on its side so we can see how well decorated it is. Right? Expensive. This is not your everyday silver, right? These are brought out for a very, very nice meal. Back behind the pie, we have this wonderful glass jar, right? From the ripples, we know it came from Venice. So it's an Italian glass jar, probably full of vinegar. That's one of the things you would have with mince pie, right? But they sort of pulled out all the stops, all of the most luxurious things that you could have. Lemons. Lemons don't grow in Holland. Remember with the Arnolfinis, we talked about the oranges on the wall, right? Oranges are an import fruit. They're from Italy. It's a citrus fruit. It needs Mediterranean climates. It is too cold and too wet in Holland to grow lemons. That's an imported fruit. Olives directly behind it on the plate. Some on the plate, some off the plate. Again, imports from the Mediterranean countries. Behind that, a local thing, but a delicacy, oysters. Again, talk about rich flavors, right? I love to be a good oyster, but I don't want them every single day because it's a bit much in the texture, right? This sloppy, like eating a tongue, right, of the oyster. So we got oysters back here, right? So all of these things come together to sort of say that this is an incredibly elegant meal, right? Now, we'll pick up with this because we're out of time. There's more to it than just that, and we'll talk about that part next. So on Monday, we'll be picking up with Haida and wrapping up Dutch Baroque, right? I will be downloading your worksheet number 5, and I'll email you back when I've got them downloaded, either first thing in the morning or later tonight, okay? So, again, sorry that I haven't gotten those to you sooner.